What are Jesus' counsels when it comes to makeup, colorful cosmetics, jewelry, tattoos? What does God say about these things? These are very important because these are emblems of worldliness that has affected God's people. These are emblems of worldliness. Tattoos in the Bible were signs of heathenism. In other words, whenever an individual had tattoos printed on their bodies, it was a sign that they were connected with heathenism and paganism. Jeremiah 10 and verse 2 and Leviticus 19 verse 28. Literally, the Bible shows that these things were connected to paganism and heathenism. And this is why God did not want his people covering themselves and dolling themselves up with tattoos upon their bodies. But it's not just that. It was also colorful cosmetics. Did you know that colorful cosmetics were signs of sin, apostasy, and heathenism in the Bible? Literally, if you study the whole entire Bible out and look up every event, every time that somebody was dolling themselves up with lipstick and eyeshadow and all these other things, all these different colorful cosmetics. When they did that, it was always a sign of sin, a sign of apostasy, and also a sign of heathenism. And here are your verses, 2 Kings 9 and verse 30. Jeremiah 4 and verse 30, and Ezekiel 23 and verse 40. Literally, all these Bible verses, they showed that makeup and all these things, colorful cosmetics. We're not talking about something that's even tone. We're talking about colorful cosmetics. Your lips, you did not come out your mother's womb with these deep red, dark lips. And you should understand the implications of that when God's people do it. Also, a lot of times the makeup comes from a lot of these roadkill, animals that get killed on the street and some of these things. And these makeup companies, they literally put not only poisonous chemicals, but they also put a lot of these remaining portions of dead animals in the mixture of the things that we start rubbing on our lips and our faces. We wonder why when we put on a lot of makeup, sometimes we start breaking out with pimples and all these other things. It's a bunch of toxicity that we're putting in our system. It's not even healthy, let alone it doesn't represent God. So God doesn't want his people dolling themselves up with colorful cosmetics. It was something that was a sign of sin, a sign of heathenism, a sign of apostasy. But then there was also jewelry. Jewelry was signs of heathenism and false gods. Jewelry. And when you look at jewelry, there's a lot of Bible verses that we can consider. So I want you to look at it. Look at all these. These are all Bible verses just on the subject of jewelry. I'm giving it to you more so to write down and research because there's just no way that we can go through all of them verse by verse. It doesn't allow us enough time. In 1 Timothy 2:9, 1 Peter 3:3, Revelation 12, 1-4, compared with Revelation 17, 1-5, Genesis, the 35th chapter, Exodus, the 32nd chapter, Isaiah 3, 16 through 26, very powerful. Hosea 2 and verse 13, and 1 John 2, 15 and 16. I mean, these were very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. These verses were all showing God's attitude of his people donning themselves with all sorts of jewels. Earrings, neck chain, rings, and so on. And I do have to say this, brothers and sisters, in the mind of God, there was no difference between a wedding ring and a college ring. So you can't say that wedding rings are okay while a college ring or some other ring is bad. Rings are rings in the Bible. There was no differentiation. There was none. So literally, if we're going to say a wedding ring is all right, you just endorsed your young people to go ahead and put earrings and a lot of other rings on their body. Because the same way we have no biblical premise for saying that we can wear wedding rings is the same way they can say, well, you have no biblical premise for saying I need to take off my college ring or my earrings. So therefore, in the eyes of God, rings are rings. Now, of all these verses that talk about jewelry and God's people donning themselves with it, there is nothing that makes it more clear to me than Deuteronomy 7, 25 and 26. That verse we're going to look at. In Deuteronomy 7, God actually made a statement about jewelry that really, really hits the nail on the head. And I think you and I should consider this as God's people, his representatives. So let's consider it. I'm going to go ahead and move from this slide now, and I'm going to show us Deuteronomy 7, 25 and 26. So let's consider it. In Deuteronomy 7, you see these two images here. Now, generally, I will see these images, especially when I go to restaurants in the U.S. If I were to go to a Chinese restaurant, even if it's a vegan Chinese restaurant, you can always see images like this. Have you ever seen images like this before? All right. And then, of course, if you go to certain Indian restaurants, you can start seeing images like this as well. Now, what do you see on these images? They're wearing what? They're wearing jewelry. Now watch what God said in Deuteronomy 7. God says, the graven images of their gods. He was talking about images, graven images. Look at the text carefully. The graven images of their gods shall ye burn with fire. Thou shalt not desire the silver or gold that is what? Wait. What did God want to be done with the image? He wanted what to be done with the image? Burn it with fire. So now it says, the silver or gold that is on them. So what's the silver and what's the them? The them is what? The them is the image. So there's silver and gold on the image. What do we call that? Jewelry. So notice, thou shalt not desire the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it unto thee, talking about jewelry, lest thou be snared therein. For it is an abomination to the Lord thy God. Neither shalt thou bring an abomination into thine house, lest thou be a cursed thing like it, but thou shalt utterly detest it, and thou shalt utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing. God's word is clear. God does not want his people donning themselves with jewelry. God does not want us doing it. God says the jewelry that is on these graven images, he says, I don't want my people wearing it. I do not want my people wearing these things. Do not put it upon you. God makes his words very clear on this point, brothers and sisters. And this is why, as God's people, we know that jewelry is a sign of worldliness. These earrings piercing your precious ears for the mere sake of trying to look good. Sisters, you were beautiful before your ears were ever touched with some blade. Before some needle, you were already beautiful. It's only the world that lied to you and made you think that you're more beautiful now that you got something hanging from your ears. But God wanted you to know you were already beautiful, and godly men will let you know that you're beautiful. You don't need to put earrings on. God says, I don't want my people piercing their bodies. But yet this is what we see today. Something strange about Asia. In Asia, there's really an infatuation with makeup. Absolute infatuation. I mean, I've been to certain stores here in the Philippines. I mean, the women look like porcelain dolls almost. I mean, it's like literally their faces look so incredibly fake. Why? It's because they're just caked with makeup and all these things. I mean, just what an ill representation, brothers and sisters. It bears a false witness, quite honestly. By the way, I think it is unfair and it is very deceptive when you cover your real image up with all this makeup and get married to a man and then have the nerve to want to take makeup off. That's not even right, because now that brother's going to deal with an image that he's saying, I never saw this before, and he may not be pleased with it. That's bearing a false witness. I think that's wrong. I'm serious, brothers and sisters. I remember one time, years ago, it's the truth. Years ago, I was in the world, and there used to be this girl that came to our school. Her name was Tina. And Tina would come to the school, and, everybody liked Tina. When Tina walked through the room, everybody was just like, wow, she's so pretty. And somehow, some way, I ended up winning her over. And says, she was willing to be my girlfriend. So I went to pick her up at the house one day. And I went to pick her up at the house. And when I picked her up at the house, I knocked on the door. Now, I showed up early. I told her I was going to be there at 1 o'clock, but I had some free time, so I showed up at 11 o'clock. So 11 o'clock, I showed up, knock, knock, and I knocked on the door. Somebody said, who is it? And I wanted to play it off like it wasn't me. So I was like, oh, the mailman, whatever. And the person came to the door, and I saw something come to the door. And I saw a face, but I had no idea who that was. And then the person goes, ah, and then she ducks. And she says, Dwayne, what are you doing here? I said, Tina? And she said, yes. And I was like, oh no, what did I do? And next thing you know, she says, give me 2 hours and let me put on my face. 2 hours later, she comes downstairs, and now she's the Tina that I remembered in school. And that was the first lesson. I said, I don't know if I want to marry somebody that has two faces. I began thinking about it. I said, I don't know if I want to do that. I really began to realize, I believe that covering ourselves with it's almost like bearing a false witness. We present a picture of ourselves that's not true at all. And sometimes people don't really know what we look like and what we are representing ourselves as. So, I understand that, it probably makes you laugh, but I'm really not trying to make you laugh. I'm trying to make a point that it is imperative that we understand God does not want us covering ourselves with all these artificials. It bears a false witness. It stimulates a greater desire for more artificial. You are beautiful sisters just in your natural selves. And all you need is to make sure that there is a godly man that can appreciate you just for who you are. But you don't need to go around putting all this fakeness and all these things on yourself. You're making your body sick. You're bearing a false witness. You're not really happy. And a lot of times makeup ends up causing all these undue wrinkles, pimples, and all these other things later on in life anyhow. Who needs all of that? And most importantly, it displeases God. It is an image of worldliness. It is for these reasons that God says, I want my people to come out of it, because worldliness does not please